My name is Mia. I am 34 years old, a cardiologist, and a single mother to 3-year-old twins. 2 months ago, I was lying in the back of an ambulance, strapped to a stretcher with a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. A truck had run a red light and slammed into my driver's side door. In that moment of terror, my only thought wasn't about my own life. It was about my children, Lily and Lucas, who were at home with a babysitter who had to leave in 45 minutes. With shaking hands, I dialed my parents' number. I did not need money. I did not need them to save me. I just needed my mother and father to watch their grandchildren for a few hours while surgeons tried to save my life. The phone rang 4 times before my father, Richard, answered. His voice was impatient. He told me they were about to leave and did not have time for drama. I tried to explain that I was being rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery, but the line went dead. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. It was a text message from my mother, Helen. I will never forget the words staring back at me from that cracked screen. It read, "Mia, you have always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Bella tonight. We have been planning this for months. Figure it out yourself." I stared at the phone in disbelief. A second later, a reaction popped up on the message. My sister Bella had reacted with a laughing emoji. That was it. That was all my life was worth to them. A laughing emoji while I lay bleeding in an ambulance. Something inside me snapped, and it hurt more than the injuries. I realized in that cold, sterile ambulance that I was completely alone. So, I did what I always do. I handled it. From my hospital bed, I called an emergency nanny service and paid triple the rate to ensure my children were safe. And then, I made a decision that would destroy their comfortable lives. For the last 8 years, I had been secretly paying their mortgage, their health insurance, and their car payments. I looked at the automatic transfers scheduled for the next day. I canceled them all. Every single penny. I cut off the $364,000 lifeline I had given them. They called me a burden. I decided it was time to show them what a burden truly feels like. To understand how my parents could leave me bleeding in an ambulance for a concert, you have to understand the house I grew up in. In the Carver household, I learned very early that love came with a strict ranking system. My sister Bella was the star. She was effortlessly beautiful, charismatic, and had a magnetic quality that made my parents light up whenever she walked into a room. I was just the background noise. The disparity wasn't subtle. It was loud and deliberate. I remember the day Bella announced she wanted to pursue fashion design. My mother cried happy tears, and my father beamed, calling her our little visionary. But when I told them I wanted to become a doctor, my dad merely nodded and said, "That's practical. At least one of you will be able to pay the bills." That one word defined my entire existence to them. Practical. I told myself it didn't matter. I buried myself in textbooks and clawed my way into a top medical school, believing that if I achieved enough, I would finally earn the same affection Bella received for simply existing. I was wrong. The day I graduated from medical school should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, my parents arrived 2 hours late. There were no flowers, no celebration dinner, and no tears of pride. They took a single blurry photo with me in the parking lot before rushing off because Bella needed emotional support after a meeting with an investor. Compare that to Bella's first fashion show in New York 3 years earlier. The whole family flew out, stayed in a 5-star hotel, and sat in the front row. My dad posted 17 photos on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of our talented girl." For me, I got a lukewarm congrats and a view of the asphalt. I rationalized it for years. I told myself fashion was competitive and Bella needed the extra support, while medicine was stable, so I could handle things on my own. But deep down, I internalized a dangerous lie. That I was unlovable unless I was useful. I became the fixer and the wallet. Conditioned to believe that my only value to this family was my ability to solve their problems and fund their lifestyles. I didn't know it then, but that parking lot photo was a preview of exactly how much they valued my life compared to Bella's comfort. The financial abuse didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as family duty. It started 8 years ago, shortly after I finished my residency. I remember the phone call vividly. My father called me one evening, his voice tight with fake embarrassment, telling me they were in a bit of a bind. The mortgage payment was due, things were tight, and he asked if I could help just this once. Without hesitation, I transferred $2,400 that night. They were my parents. Of course, I would help. But just this once turned into a monthly obligation that lasted nearly a decade. That initial transfer became a permanent line item in my budget. First, it was the mortgage. Then, when my dad's company dropped their coverage, I took over their health insurance premiums at $800 a month. Then came the endless stream of emergencies. The roof leak, the new furnace, the car repairs. I never said no. Not once. Being a doctor, I am meticulous by nature, so I kept a spreadsheet of every single transfer. I don't know why I did it, maybe some part of me needed to see the sacrifice in black and white. When I finally tallied the numbers, the total was staggering. Over 8 years, I had given them $364,200. The reality of that number is nauseating when I think about what my life looked like during those years. I was working 16-hour shifts at the hospital, running on caffeine and adrenaline. I was raising twin toddlers alone after their father walked out, barely sleeping as I nursed 2 newborns while studying for my board exams. Yet, the automatic transfers to my parents never stopped. While I was drowning in exhaustion to keep them afloat, they were living comfortably in a house I paid for, driving cars I fixed, and using their own money to fund Bella's failing fashion career. They flew first class to her shows while I paid their electric bill. The irony is sharp enough to draw blood. In that text message, they called me a burden. They called me a nuisance. Yet, for 8 long years, I was the only reason they had a roof over their heads. The surgery to repair my ruptured spleen took 4 hours. Another few minutes, the doctors said, and I might not have made it. I spent the next 5 days in that hospital room, 120 hours of IV drips, morphine haze, and nurses checking my vitals. During that entire time, I waited. I waited for my phone to ring. I waited for a text saying they were sorry, or even just asking if I was alive. But the phone stayed silent. Well, not entirely silent. While I lay there in pain, I saw photos popping up on social media. There was my mother, smiling with a cocktail in her hand. There was Bella, posing with her VIP wristband at the concert. They weren't worried. They were partying. The contrast was blinding. I had hired an emergency nanny service, complete strangers who were sending me hourly photo updates of Lily and Lucas, reassuring me that my children were safe and fed. Strangers were treating me and my children with more care than the people who gave me life. That was when the denial finally died. The text message calling me a nuisance wasn't a mistake or a heat-of-the-moment outburst. It was their truth. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an appliance that had malfunctioned. On the 3rd day, I asked the nurse for my phone. My hands were steady as I logged into my banking app. 8 years of automatic transfers stared back at me, regular as clockwork. $2,400 scheduled for the 1st of the month, $800 for the 15th. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply hit cancel. I deleted the mortgage payment. I deleted the insurance transfer. I deleted the car payments. One by one, I severed the financial arteries that had kept their lifestyle alive. Then, I went to my contacts. I blocked my father. I blocked Bella. I expected to feel terrified. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, as I laid the phone back on the bedside table, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It felt like setting down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for 34 years, one I hadn't realized was crushing me until it was gone. Later that afternoon, Dr. Marcus, a colleague who had checked on me every day, asked how I was feeling. For the first time in 8 years, I looked him in the eye and told the truth. I feel better. I knew the fallout was coming. They would notice the money was gone eventually. But for the first time, I was saving my energy for the only person who actually needed it. Myself. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was finally recovering at home. moving slowly but grateful to be alive. I was making pancakes for the twins on a Saturday morning when 3 sharp raps echoed on my front door. My heart rate spiked immediately. I wasn't ready to face my parents. I checked the peephole, expecting to see my father's angry face. Instead, I saw a tall man with silver hair and the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime commanding respect. It was Grandpa Thomas. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years because my parents always found excuses to keep us apart. Grandpa Thomas is 75 years old and a retired federal judge. He is known for 2 things: his terrifying intellect and his absolute inability to tolerate lies. I opened the door, and without a word, he pulled me into a hug so tight it made my surgical incision ache. "Let me look at you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Then he looked me in the eye and said the 3 words that changed everything. "I know everything." He explained that Aunt Eleanor, my mother's younger sister, and the family black sheep who always refused to pretend things were perfect, had called him the night of the accident. She told him about the text message. She told him about the abandoned surgery. Grandpa Thomas sat at my kitchen table, watching my children play, and his expression darkened. "I have watched this for years, Mia," he said. "The way Richard and Helen treat you versus Bella. I am old, but I am not blind. I know what exploitation looks like." He didn't offer empty comfort. He offered a plan. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, an invitation to his 70th birthday jubilee next Saturday. "The whole family will be there," he said. "Every bank statement, every transfer confirmation, every text message." I asked him why. He looked at me steadily and said, "Because in my courtroom, facts speak for themselves. I intend for the truth to come out, not as an attack, but as evidence." He was offering me vindication. For the next week, I worked like a clerk preparing for the trial of the century. I printed 8 years of financial records, organized them chronologically, and bound them in a plain manila folder. Looking at the stack of paper, the sheer volume of money I had given them made me nauseous. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The day of the party arrived with a gray sky that matched the knot in my stomach. Grandpa Thomas's house is a sprawling colonial estate on 3 acres of manicured land, with white columns and a wraparound porch, the kind of place that whispers old money and quiet authority. As I pulled into the circular driveway, my hands were tight on the steering wheel. More than 40 cars lined the property. I grabbed my bag, checking one last time to make sure the plain manila folder was inside. I was still moving stiffly from my injuries, every step a reminder of the surgery I had survived just weeks ago. I walked inside, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. My parents were standing near the fireplace, Dad in his best suit, Mom in a cream-colored dress holding court with a glass of champagne. When they saw me, my mother's laugh died. My father's face went rigid. But it was Bella who moved first. My sister glided over in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes were ice. "Oh, Mia," she said, air kissing my cheek. "You made it. We heard about your accident. Nothing too serious, I hope?" I met her gaze steadily. "A ruptured spleen and internal bleeding, Bella. I almost died." Her smile didn't waver. "Mom said it was just a fender bender." She patted my arm with a condescending pity that made my skin crawl. "Well, you look fine now. That's what matters." She drifted away before I could respond, but I quickly realized she wasn't just being rude, she was executing a strategy. As I made my way through the room, I felt the eyes on me, pitying looks, whispered concerns. A cousin I barely spoke to had texted me earlier saying, "Heard you're having a breakdown." Now, I saw why. I overheard my mother crying to a group of aunts near the dessert table, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "We've tried everything," she sobbed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Calls, texts. She won't respond. We think the stress of the accident caused some kind of mental breakdown. We are just so worried about her state of mind." They were painting a masterpiece of lies. In their version of the story, they were the loving, victimized parents trying to save their unstable, ungrateful daughter. They were poisoning the well before I could even take a sip. My Aunt Eleanor appeared at my side, her voice low and furious. "They've been laying the groundwork all week," she whispered. "They know something is coming, and they are trying to discredit you first." I tightened my grip on the bag, holding the bank statements. They thought they were dealing with a broken woman. They had no idea I was holding the receipts that would burn their narrative to the ground. The climax of the evening began when the string quartet finally stopped playing. The room quieted as Grandpa Thomas rose from his chair. At 75, he still commanded attention like the courtroom judge he had been for 4 decades. He tapped his glass, ready to speak, but before he could utter a word, my father interrupted. "Dad, wait," Richard said, his voice projecting easily across the silent room. "Before you say anything, there is something the family needs to know." Grandpa paused, raising a silver eyebrow, but he allowed it. It was exactly what my father wanted. He put on a masterful performance of the concerned father, turning to face the crowd with a mask of sorrow and exhaustion. "As many of you have heard, our daughter Mia has been going through a very difficult time since her accident," he said, gesturing vaguely toward where I stood holding my son. "She has been confused, distant, and has pushed us away completely. But we want her to know, here in front of everyone, that we support her no matter what." It was sickeningly perfect. My mother, Helen, stepped up beside him, dabbing at dry eyes with her lace handkerchief. "We have only ever wanted the best for her," she said, her voice trembling for dramatic effect. "We gave that girl everything." From across the room, Bella chimed in to seal the narrative. "It's true," she said, shaking her head sadly as she looked at our aunts. "She's even been claiming we refused to help her during the accident, which is absolutely not true. It was just a terrible misunderstanding. We love her." I stood frozen near the dessert table. I could feel the eyes of 40 relatives boring into me, some judging, some pitying. My parents and Bella looked triumphant. They were banking on the fact that I was the practical one, the polite doctor who would never cause a scene in public. They believed they had won the narrative war by painting me as unstable before I could even open my mouth. But they had forgotten who else was in the room. Grandpa Thomas watched them dig their own graves with a stony expression. When the murmurs died down, his voice cut through the air, not with anger, but with the cold, steel authority of a federal judge. "Are you finished, Richard?" he asked. The room went deadly quiet. My father's confident smile faltered. "I just thought the family should know," Dad stammered. "The family should know the truth," Grandpa interrupted, walking to the center of the room. "The trap had snapped shut, and I intend to give it to them." Grandpa Thomas didn't scream. He didn't need to. He simply stood in the center of the room, looking at my father with the same terrifying calm he used to reserve for perjury cases. He asked one simple question that sucked the air right out of the room. "Richard," he said, his voice level, "who has been paying the mortgage on your house for the past 8 years?" My father blinked, caught off guard. He looked at my mother, then back at the crowd of confused relatives. The lie came out instinctively, a reflex to protect his ego. "We do," he stammered, straightening his tie. "We pay our own mortgage." "What kind of question is that?" "Do you?" Grandpa reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out the plain manila folder I had prepared. "That is interesting, because I have here a complete record of bank transfers from Mia's account to your mortgage lender. Every month, for 96 consecutive months." He opened the folder, and the sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the house. He began to read the data aloud, not as a family member, but as a prosecutor presenting undeniable evidence. "Mortgage payments," Grandpa read, holding up the first page. $2,400 a month, total over 8 years. $230,400. He flipped the page. My mother let out a small, strangled sound, but Grandpa didn't look up. "Health insurance premiums, after your company dropped coverage, $76,800. He flipped another page. "Car leases, home repairs, and cash transfers to support Bella's lifestyle." He looked directly at my sister, whose smug smile had completely vanished. "Grand total, $364,200. He closed the folder and tossed it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. The silence was deafening. My father's face had drained of all color. My mother looked like she might faint. You stood here and claimed you supported her? Grandpa's voice rose for the first time, sharp with disgust. Mia has been supporting you since the day she finished medical school. You live in a house she bought. You drive cars she leased. You are wearing clothes she paid for. The facade of the wealthy, successful parents crumbled instantly. I watched as my aunts and uncles looked from the folder to my parents, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. They realized the truth all at once. Richard and Helen weren't the victims. They were financial parasites who had been living off their single mother-daughter for nearly a decade. The specific dollar amounts made the abuse tangible. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was theft. Having destroyed their financial reputation, I thought Grandpa Thomas was finished. The room was already buzzing with shock, my parents looking like cornered animals. But Grandpa wasn't done. He knew that stealing money was one thing, losing your humanity was another. He adjusted his glasses and looked at my parents with a disdain so deep it made the air feel cold. The money is one thing, Grandpa said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Greed is a sin, certainly, but cruelty? That is unforgivable. He pulled out his smartphone and held it up. 2 weeks ago, Mia was in a near-fatal car accident. She was bleeding internally in an ambulance. She called her parents begging for help because her 3-year-old twins were at home with a babysitter who had to leave. And this is what her mother sent her in response. Grandpa tapped his screen and read the message aloud, ensuring every syllable echoed in the silent room. Mia, you have always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Bella tonight. We have been planning this for months. Figure it out yourself. The reaction was explosive. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. My Aunt Eleanor covered her mouth in horror. A cousin whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough to be heard. My mother shrank back, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head as if denying reality. Bella, realizing their social standing was disintegrating in real time, tried to shout over the rising noise. "You're taking it out of context!" she screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. It was a stressful night. We didn't mean it like that. Aunt Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes blazing. She snapped, "There is no context that makes abandoning your dying child acceptable. None." My father tried to stammer a defense, claiming they didn't know it was serious. But Grandpa Thomas silenced him with a single look. He delivered the final judgment that we had all been waiting for. "You called her a burden?" Grandpa asked, gesturing to where I stood holding my son. "The girl who paid $364,000 to keep a roof over your heads? The girl who sacrificed her own comfort so you could pretend to be wealthy?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried across the room. "No, you are the burdens." That was the moment the power shifted forever. I saw a distant cousin step physically away from my parents, his face twisted in disgust. Then another relative turned their back. Then another. My parents stood alone in the center of the room, publicly shamed, isolated, and stripped of the power they had held over me for 34 years. It was the ultimate catharsis. They were no longer the giants of my childhood. The party ended, and with it, the facade my family had maintained for decades finally collapsed. In the silence that followed, the consequences came swiftly. Without my funding, the life my parents had built on my back disintegrated. Just 3 months after the party, Aunt Eleanor called to tell me the news. My parents had put the house on the market. They couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments I had been covering for 8 years. Today, Richard and Helen are living in Uncle Frank's guest house. But there was a catch. Uncle Frank made it conditional. For the first time in years, they had to get jobs. My father is working at a local hardware store, and my mother is doing bookkeeping. They are no longer living the high life. They are simply surviving. As for Bella, the fashion world is small, and word travels fast. Stripped of her funding and her social standing, she lost her major design contracts. The last I heard, she was waitressing to make ends meet, finally learning the value of a dollar she actually earned. They tried to contact me, of course. My mother called from a new number, leaving weeping voicemails about how devastated they were. Bella sent texts trying to explain herself, but I maintained my silence. I didn't block them out of spite. I blocked them because I finally respected myself too much to listen to lies. Instead of funding their lifestyle, I took the $3,200 I was saving every month and started a college fund for Lily and Lucas. They will never have to carry a burden they didn't create. I also bought a new place, a modest 2-bedroom apartment 5 minutes from the hospital. It isn't a sprawling estate, but it is beautiful because it is mine. Every bill paid is for my children, not for people who called me a nuisance. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Love is not a transaction. You cannot buy the affection of people who only love your utility. For 34 years, I thought if I gave enough, I would be enough. I was wrong. Setting boundaries isn't betrayal. It is survival. If the people who raised you call your self-respect selfishness, they never deserved your loyalty in the first place. To anyone out there setting themselves on fire to keep others warm, put down the match. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose yourself. It might be scary at first, but I promise you, on the other side of that fear is freedom. And you deserve to be free.